Hello and welcome back to Full Wet Formula One. I'm your host that's as useful as a full wet tire. We're going to be doing a recap of the Australian Grand Prix race weekend, and we're going to be doing a little bit of looking ahead to China, maybe some predictions. I'll have my wife come in and do her predictions as well, and we'll see how we did last week. Let's start with a quick recap of the Australian Grand Prix weekend, where we had a shocking Q1 exit from Max Verstappen taking him out of qualifying. We had Oscar Piastri falling prey to the home race Australian Grand Prix curse. We had Aston Martin stuck in Honda hell at the back of the pack, entering and exiting the race basically at will, like it was a free practice session. Cadillac languishing at the back of the pack, kind of where we expected them to be, but hey, at least they had a driver finish the race. Williams suffering from their boat of a car that they've produced for this year. Hopefully they can get the weight down and some reliability up, and they can finish a little higher in the pack. Franco Colapinto quickly coming to the top of the list of people that Flavio Briatore would like to murder in their sleep, but he did not crash the car at the start of the race behind Liam Lawson in an amazing save. Liam Lawson being beaten in his first race by his rookie teammate. Esteban Ocon also suffering a similar fate with his teammate Oliver Behrman finishing in the points on debut, and him just outside in P11. Pierre Gasly scoring points in the first race of the season, as well as Gabriel Bortoleto in the debut race for Audi Formula One team. Arvid Lindblad putting in a fantastic showing for his rookie debut, scoring 4 points and also fighting multiple champions at the front of the grid, showing he has the capacity to do some fantastic wheel-to-wheel racing, as well as a good qualifying session for him, getting into Q3 and then having car issues qualifying him behind his teammate. Oliver Behrman showing more and more that he has the stuff that it takes to be in this sport for the long haul. Max Verstappen cutting through the pack from P20 into P6 in a great recovery drive. Lando Norris coming P5, the defending champion, not where they want to be in that McLaren car. Lewis Hamilton in a P4 in a very enthusiastic race for him. He was smiling. The communication with the race engineer was much better than what we've seen from his time at Ferrari. And then a podium for Charles Leclerc, Kimi Antonelli P2, and a George Russell P1. So far this year, it looks like Mercedes is dominating, but Ferrari came with a good showing as well, with Charles battling at the front with George. A fantastic race start for him to take the lead, and then a battle back and forth over the next several laps between George and Charles for the lead of the race. Kimi Antonelli kind of had a bad start, but then made a recovery drive, and then we ended up with classic Ferrari strategy. The only thing keeping Ferrari back is Ferrari themselves. At this point, though, you would think that both of their drivers would know better than to listen to Ferrari and would call the shots, similar to what we saw Carlos Sainz doing when he was at Ferrari, where he would just say, hey guys, I'm coming into the pit. What are they going to do? Stare at you and not change the tires? Of course, they're going to put tires on the car, they're going to send you back out, and then maybe you have a shot at fighting the Mercedes. I think with Charles' time at Ferrari and Lewis's time in sport, somebody should have just made the call. I think the person really should have been Lewis. He didn't have the track position. He wasn't in P1. Hopefully going forward, Lewis will just kind of make that call on his own instead of relying on Ferrari to finally make a good decision for once. But we did see that Ferrari has what it takes in terms of the race starts, at least. And we saw kind of what the overtake was going to do for us and how the battery deployment is going to play into racing. And so far, it seems like the racing is significantly better than it was in previous years in terms of overtakes at the very least. Now, you do have some people that are complaining that it does feel somewhat artificial, but what is true racing if that's artificial? I mean, if DRS wasn't artificial to the same people complaining, and the same people complaining were also complaining that, you know, it's a qualifying formula. You just qualify and that's where you stay, or, you know, you pass someone at turn one and whoever's at the ahead at turn one finishes the race ahead. At least we saw some fighting for the lead. We saw a lot of fights in the midfield, a ton of battles going back and forth until somebody finally overtook for the final time, made it ahead. And hopefully this continues throughout the regulation cycle and we get some exciting racing for a few years here, but we just kind of have to wait and see. This is all going to pan out. They're going to change regulations, it sounds like already. Sounds like they're going to make some modifications, but hopefully we can maintain this kind of style of racing, at least where there is some overtaking and you do have to fight for your position, and you know, you overtake one corner and then the next lap or a few corners later someone's coming back. We're seeing overtakes that are happening in places that we haven't seen them in a long time or maybe ever. I'm just waiting to see how this all pans out, but so far I'm cautiously optimistic about the racing. Qualifying is less exciting because of the clipping on the straights. And while we're talking about panning away, I would like to jump back and talk about very quickly, kind of give the Formula One TV direction their flowers. I thought the TV direction for the race last week was significantly better. There were still problems, but significantly better than what we've seen in the past. Most of the battles were well televised. We weren't looking at the garages when there was action happening on track. If there was action happening somewhere else on track other than the front, they were good at putting the picture-in-picture, on the side, on the timing tower. I thought the TV direction was very good. So let's jump into the two big accidents that happened. Let's start with Max Verstappen in qualifying. When that initially happened, I looked at my wife and said that is an issue with the way the rear brakes are controlled. So in the Formula One cars this year, the front brake is a brake by hydraulic. So like a typical road car, you press the brake in, it depresses the hydraulic cylinder that increases brake fluid and it applies braking pressure through the caliper. That's how the front brakes work. Normal, nothing to see here. The rear brakes is a drive-by-wire system. There's a sensor that senses how much brake pressure the driver is inputting, and then that feeds into a brake controller that is also tied in with the energy harvesting system of the MGUK. And so they have to map the inputs of the brake and the input and the braking of the MGUK and get them to do what the driver is expecting it to do, essentially. And to me, that looked a lot like there was something wrong with either how the software interpreted the braking there and just applied more brake or more MGUK than what was being called for there. And so he just instantly went into a lockup and then spun and he was out in Q3. So I think that's kind of what was going on there. It had to do with the brake controller that's controlling the MGUK and the brakes together to apply that braking to the rear wheels. It seemed that is the most likely case there. I don't really think that there was a driver error. I think it could have been a software issue, or it could have just been how they had it mapped, but it was definitely something to do with that rear brake controller there. And then the Oscar Piastri spin, I'm going to kind of default to someone with better knowledge of the current racing regulations than I have. I was watching Lower Lap Time on YouTube. Shout out to Lower Lap Time if you want to learn more about racing lines and about regulations and things like that. Fantastic resource. But he was talking about how, and I'm going to summarize, if you want to know more, you should watch his video on this. He was talking about how the regulations state how much electrical power has to be deployed during different stages of the lap and then in different stages of the pedal deployment for acceleration. And so it seemed to him that this was a mistake on Oscar's part, where he was expecting a certain amount of deployment, but according to how the regulations are written, he was basically required to have a certain amount of deployment with how his throttle position was. And so it seemed to be more of a driver error on Oscar's part. But then there's a third component that I would like to talk about as well, that we do have more AI power in Formula One than we've ever had. And so there's no AI allowed on the car itself, but what the teams are doing and what they can do is they have AI computing back at the factory, or probably some that's happening there at the race as well. And the AI is taking into account track conditions and how the laps have gone previously, and it's learning lap by lap what the driver needs in certain areas to speed up. And then they're taking those needs and mapping the ECU of the car to harvest more in certain areas or deploy more in certain areas. And so it could also be the case that the software was mapped in a specific way in both of these instances that affected outcomes for the drivers. And so this is something I think will be kind of problematic, especially early on with a very low understanding of these regs that everyone has right now, including the teams, where we may see some issues on the software side that are playing into issues with the drivers and how the drivers are perceiving what they think the car should be doing versus what the car is actually doing. And I hope it can get cleaned up. It almost seems like a borderline safety issue. I don't think there's any way around it. I think this is kind of the way the whole world's going, that we're going to have more of this like AI integration where you have simulations or software controlling more and more in our daily lives. Hopefully this is something that we can kind of not have to talk about for very long, that gets dialed in quickly and corrected quickly, and it doesn't lead to these moments where, what could have been moments. Now, in terms of our predictions, how did we do? I had P1 Max Verstappen, and that's a big no. That was George Russell. For P2, I had George Russell, and we had Kimi Antonelli. For P3, I had Charles Leclerc, and Charles Leclerc did come in P3. For P4, I had Kimi Antonelli, and that was Lewis Hamilton. And for P5, I had Lewis Hamilton, and that was Lando Norris. So I have scored 1 point for my predictions. My wife had Max Verstappen in P1, George Russell for P2, Oscar Piastri for P3, poor Oscar, Lewis Hamilton P4, so she gets a point there, and P5, Charles Leclerc. So we are tied on points going into the Chinese Grand Prix, but we have both seen the race results from here and kind of how things are shaping up. So maybe we'll both do a little better next time. So moving on, looking forward to next week, I'd like to first just talk about the track a little bit. There's going to be more room for energy harvesting on this track than Australia. Australia is one of the worst tracks for energy harvesting. Jeddah and Monza are the other two particularly bad tracks. Doesn't look like we're going to see Jeddah this year, so we don't have to worry about that one. But Monza will be another issue for harvesting energy. China will be a lot better for harvesting energy, has a lot heavier braking zones. But the problem we're going to see in China is that long back straight between turns 13 and 14, and a fairly long start-finish straight between turn 16 and turn 1. I think we're going to see heavy clipping between turns 13 and 14. I just don't think there's any way around it. They're going to run out of battery on that stretch of the track. Even though they have plenty of opportunity to kind of build up before that, there's probably going to be some deployment between turn 10 and 11. But we're going to see a lot of clipping on the back half of that straight between 13 and 14. So whoever can deploy more there, and this will be one of those tracks where harvesting energy will be fairly important as well. I think that that's going to cause some problems. So I'm kind of curious to see if there's anything to the Red Bull rumors kind of came out of preseason testing on harvesting energy. I don't really put a lot of stock into it because it was Mercedes pointing the finger, but we'll have to see if that plays into this track at all. I definitely expect qualifying to be panning away from turn 13 and 14 quite a bit, just because they don't want to show the car slowing down. A lot of people on the internet are talking about, if you have to slow down, on a straightaway, it's not Formula One, etc. I do understand it. It doesn't look great in qualifying. The racing has looked a lot better than qualifying this year, but that's a sacrifice I'm personally willing to make. I think last year, a lot of it was the excitement in qualifying and then lap one, and then no excitement after that. If I have to sacrifice a little bit of the qualifying excitement to have a solid hour of excitement, or hour and a half, or even 2 hours if the battles go all the way to the end, that's a sacrifice I'm personally willing to make. So let's dive into my top 5 predictions for the Chinese Grand Prix, starting with P5, Charles Leclerc. I think Ferrari doesn't quite have the same top speed as Mercedes. It's hard to tell so far with the telemetry between Ferrari and Red Bull, but it seems Red Bull is a little bit closer to Mercedes. And with the long back straight and the fairly long start to finish straight, I think top speed is going to play somewhat of a role here. And also how much the cars clip along those straights. But Charles counts this as one of his worst tracks. So, I think this is a fairly conservative place to put Charles. Maybe he'll do better. Last race we saw him fighting at the very front, but also have to incorporate Ferrari strategy here. So we'll just have to wait and see on that front and what they want to do this week to make us all pull our hair out. But I'm going P5, Charles Leclerc. For my P4, this is going to be surprising and probably going to shoot me in the foot later. I'm going Kimi Antonelli. He finished almost a minute behind his teammate last year at the Chinese Grand Prix. It was his rookie year, but he came off of a P4 finish and then finished P6. I don't think this is a track he's as familiar with as some others. And as you'll see from the rest of my predictions, we're going to see some people who maybe suit the circuit a little better than Kimi. That being said, he's got the Mercedes underneath him. All things are possible. P3, I'm going for Lewis Hamilton, first podium with Ferrari. He loves this track. He claims it's one of his best tracks. We saw him do really well in the sprint last year. Maybe this is a little bit of hopium, but I have hated to see him struggle so hard with Ferrari. And I dislike Ferrari more than any other team on the grid. Everyone says that everyone's a Ferrari fan. I don't like the brand. I don't like the team. I take that back. I don't have a problem with the people back at the factory doing what they're doing every day. Those people keep doing your jobs. I have a problem with the structure, the corporate structure of the team. It's my least favorite team on the grid, and I'm going to get a lot of hate for this. I like the drivers. I like Charles. I like Lewis, and I hate to see him struggle. I hate to see anyone struggle under the depression that is Ferrari. I'm going Lewis Hamilton, first podium at Ferrari. Let's go. P2, I don't know if this is going to be the biggest flop of my prediction season, but I'm going Max Verstappen. I think we didn't see anything out of him in Australia in terms of, what his true potential in that car is. But again, I'm betting on chaos favoring Max. Everyone's still trying to figure things out. Max is probably putting in more sim time than anybody else. Max is probably going to adapt faster than average because of who he is. And I think that he has a chance here to be on the podium. And for P1, to no one's surprise, I'm going George Russell. George has had some good performances around this track before, and he's in that rocket ship of a Mercedes. I don't think there's anything else that needs to be said. P1, George Russell, and his continued championship dominance in the beginning of the season. And now coming for her predictions, my wife is coming with her completely on vibes predictions for the 2026 Chinese Grand Prix. So take it away. Who do you have in P5?
Oscar Piastri.
All right, Oscar Piastri, P5. And who's your P4?
Isa Kadjar.
All right, P4, Isa Kadjar, P3.
Kimi Antonelli.
Kimi Antonelli, P3. And your P2?
Lewis Hamilton.
Lewis Hamilton, P2. And your P1?
George Russell.
George Russell. Okay, everyone's in agreement. George Russell is winning the 2026 World Drivers' Championship. I'm just kidding. We have to see how things go, but so far it does seem that Mercedes car is dominant. Those are some great predictions there, and we'll see how we shape up. We are currently tied 1-1 in the drivers' prediction, so we'll see how we do this weekend. That will bring us to a close today. If you've stayed this long, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and stay wet.